tonight we're doing something fun and different. We're gonna go past the norm and go beyond the agreed upon academic norms and throw some wild theories out there. And I also want to engage with the chat as well. And we're going to talk about some theories about the Bible that not necessarily are, mainstream academic theories, but like ones that are a little beyond the norms that aren't necessarily proven, but are still nevertheless interesting. And so I got some good guests with me today, Dion and Snappy, and we're going to have a good time. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And joining me today is Dion and Snappy. Both of their links are in the description, so check those out. And definitely subscribe to We Are Drawing Down the Stars. And I'm on there a lot. I'm actually going to be on there once a week going forward. And so that link's in the description. Subscribe to Snappy's channel. And then Dion, you have a channel as well, and so you're that's a podcast that you have joined with other people as well, right?
I got a new one, and so we're getting ready to release content starting in a week or so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Links in the description for that. I'm pretty sure I have the right one in there, right? Did you check that one or no? Okay,
we'll see.
If not, I'll switch it up and make sure I have the right one in there. I have one of your podcasts in the description, so everyone check those out. Hit those links up. Subscribe to those links, and I want to talk about theories about the Bible that everybody might not know about. And Dion, I want to start with you because we were talking before we went live about this whole Adam and Eve thing. What's going on with Adam and Eve? And I'm just going to throw it over to you. Let's start fresh with this approach without any biases at all. Like, what could this story mean of Adam and Eve being split from ribs and all this stuff? What is this all about?
Oh, it's going back to the rib. That's how we start. It's the rib. That's what always threw me at the beginning of the story. God creates heavens and space and time, and everything's chill up to that point. And then creates a man, and then from there, the woman is created from the rib. That part confuses me.
Right.
Because you don't learn that at regular school. When you go to I went to school to study, I wanted to be a nurse. And they definitely don't teach you that part. What happened to the woman being equal to the man at the beginning of the story? If you look back at different mythologies, there's a male and a female. But here, the woman has to be put down into position that she's only just a man's body part.
Right. Yeah. So this is kind of the theory that we're getting at here, is that there's this pervasive idea that the feminine is removed and kind of suppressed throughout the Bible. And it begins right with this creation story. Right. And this is kind of the prime example, because when we're looking at a lot of these traditions in the area that are going on, we have these divine kind of hermaphrodites that are at the beginning of time, these bi-gendered God figures that are then split apart, usually to become creation. Like I think of the Greco-Roman Fanes as sort of like the prime example of this. Right. And it's very clear that Fanes is a bi-gendered figure, and that when they're split apart into these equal parts, right? And then there's also this idea that the original person in the Greek, like the original people, are these dual figures that have two heads that are both male and female, that then Zeus splits apart because they're too strong, right? And they can't exist as this bi-gendered form because they'll be able to threaten the gods. So there's what we're trying to highlight here is like the reason why these kind of theories are pervasive is because there's this culture in the area and in and around within these other pagan traditions of these kind of like bi-gendered beginnings, where there's this equal between the male and the female.
Yeah, when you look at Phanes, you're right. There's a serpent present. You almost gotta wonder, is this story that we see, first of all, we see the story going back to the Sumerians with Ninhursag and Enkidu, and they take it's basically the same story where they take the man and they pull something out of his backside and create the woman out of it.
But you said backside.
Yes.
That's very important.
Now tell people why that is.
How are they attached? Is it just a little body part that you pull from the body? Like the story of the leg, where they create a hero off of the leg. Is that Zeus and Dionysus?
Yes.
Dionysus
comes out. Yeah.
Out of a leg.
Like a male giving birth to the male. There's no, you don't need we don't need a mother here. It's the patriarchal succession thing happening. It's kind of interesting how that is.
It has to detach. It's almost like it's grown onto the body. It's not a natural birth. And from the backside, it would seem that they're attached. It's two beings. And so if it's from the backside, then they're detaching something that's two. If it's just a body part, then we're just pulling a little body part out.
And it's reflective again of that prime person, right? That we see within the Greek myths, right? The original person is split in two. They exist, attached at the backside. So like, it's not a big stretch here, but it's interesting, right? Like, what is going on within this Jewish tradition? Because that's not the only instance of women being suppressed and being kind of removed, right? Because there's this whole figure of Asherah, right? And this one is a lot more mainstream, because like a lot of scholars are now starting to recognize and come forward and talk about how Asherah played a much more central role within Judaism in the earlier years, and then is systematically erased from the pantheon. And like, Dion, you have a whole thing about this, about the divine family. Do you want to talk about that?
Let's do it. I love it, because I was just going to say, when you look at these ancient, I don't know, maybe I'd say Bronze Age, post-Bronze Age, somewhere in that like sweet spot, 900s BCE, 800, 700 BCE. When you look at all these city-states that are all over the Mediterranean, they have different mythologies. They're all different. It's not all uniform yet. That's a later Roman thing. But they all have these things in common, where it's like you have a father king and a divine mother, and then the divine child, and there's all these different gods that play different roles. They're all mostly polytheistic. Very, very few have just one god. But yeah, tell us about this. What's going on with that?
Yeah, Isis and Osiris, they're a couple. But at a certain point, God doesn't want a girlfriend. That's what happens. And how do you reconcile that into the story? So, well, somebody has to give birth from a rib. And then where does Cain get his wife from? We have a problem at the beginning of the story with women.
Why is that? I honestly have no idea why that is. I'm wondering, actually, I do have an idea why that is. When war becomes the main part of culture, when it's all about who can conquer the next city, think about what war is about. Male. You need men to join the armies. Women don't join the armies. Very few do. There are some. But like for the most part, in the ancient world, men would join the armies and men would raid the countries. And so like the gods that you want to, like, it's all about when it comes to anything in media, art, film, music, it's all about representation. And like, you look up to the figures, the heroes in these stories, and you try to imitate them. So you would think, evolution-wise, the countries or the civilizations, the nations that win are the ones that are following their gods, following their heroes. And then in these cases, you have these divine heroes who are like Achilles, or some god that conquers, like Yahweh or something. And so those are the cultures that follow. They're imitating the gods, and vice versa. Yep. And then the gods reflect the people.
So we call that Temple of Mars. The Temple of Mars? That's all.
The Romans are all about Mars.
Yeah. We think behind the scenes in modern times, your Hollywood entertainment complex and all the shit that's going on, that's Temple of Mars. That's your alpha cult. That's the one that takes over the other cults. You know?
And that's funny that you said that, because like when we look at the Romans, they're a warrior culture. Their main gods are Mars, Jupiter, and Romulus. They have a triad, they call it, a Capitoline triad. And you see that the great heroes of the historical heroes are trying to be like Romulus. They're imitating Romulus. They want to be like Romulus. But like Mars is their main god also, and he's the warrior god. So what happens? Rome becomes a warrior culture.
Yeah.
And is it which way is it? Is it because of Mars, or is Mars their main god because they're warriors, or is it both?
What Dion's getting at here, though, is one of the deepest, most prevalent kind of conspiracy theories you'll see in kind of like the fringes of the occult world. And this is all about this idea of this deep masculine patriarchal cult that is secretly in charge of the entire world, that's running everything. And it's connected to military, it's connected to Christianity, it's connected to masculinity and to, homosexuality and pederasty. This is like deep,
which is part of the world, which is a normal thing in this world. Do you want to know something that I found when I was when I was doing research on Macedonia and the Diadochi, and I'm very fascinated by the time period in between the Battle of Thermopylae, 480, like, this "We Are Sparta," the 300 legend. The part of history that I'm fascinated the most is that period until the time of Augustus. So that 500-year period before the birth of Jesus, basically. I don't know what it is. It's a paradigm shift of the world. And you know what I found out recently? Maybe not recently, but like one of the things that I think is not talked about a lot. Macedonia was pro-Persia, was a Persian satrap during the time of Thermopylae. So when Sparta and Athens were fighting against the Persians, Macedonia was aligned with Persia. So people don't realize this.
Nope.
When the tides turn, and when Greece, everyone calls it the Greece, came back and took over, Macedonia was part of that Persian alliance that was attacking the Athenians and the Spartans. And then when the tide turned, so you almost had to wonder, is there some sort of elite group up in Macedonia linked to Persia, and then they just decide that they're going to be the ruling power now? And then because fun fact,
you're always going to look at these things through lenses of power, right?
Right.
Why would
last thing I want to say, fun fact, Sparta stayed out. They were anti-Macedonian Empire. Sparta didn't want nothing to do with Alexander the Great. In fact, Athens didn't want anything to do with Alexander the Great. They had to force Athens to follow suit. Demosthenes hated Alexander the Great. All the great orators hated Alexander the Great. He had to conquer them to get them to say, "Fine, well, all right, fine, we'll back you up." Sparta never did. So when Alexander the Great was conquering Persia, Sparta the whole time was rebelling against him. So it wasn't this whole Hellenic league that like everything was unified perfectly. It wasn't really like that. It was, yeah. Go ahead.
No, what it is like you're saying, right? Like, you got to remember, okay, these political narratives and these alliances, and especially these cultural religious ones, they always serve a purpose. Okay, so what you see in Macedon is you see a flipping where they were once under the yoke and were connected to Persia, but that no longer suited them. So King Philip becomes more Grecian, starts adopting that and wants to go in and conquer. And then that happens with Alexander, but it's an active way to separate themselves from Persia, and they want to become Greek. It's not, so it's like an active transformation, right? This is why the Greeks themselves, right, they don't like it. They see them as barbarians, but at the same time, better the barbarians that like and celebrate your culture than the Persians who want you to be under their thumb,
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying. So all of this stuff is always political. So just going back to the Temple of Mars stuff, right? Yeah. I see it this way, is that when we look at a lot of ancient pagan religions, especially when we're going back to the ancient times that the roots of these texts are coming out of, okay, there's a political shift that's happening where the women are becoming marginalized. The women are going from being figures of power, right, being figures central to these religious cults and institutions, to being less and less as more of these dominant military cultures take over, right? And again, we're dealing with conspiracy, but there's clearly this shift where matriarchy becomes less and less and patriarchy becomes more and more. And then you gain all of these religious texts that are all about establishing this patriarchy, right? Establishing this male priesthood, establishing this singular male deity, right?
Yeah, I think you're onto something there.
But also, you said something that was the Hellenization of the area at that time, which is important because that changed history. And Christianity, that's what people argue over. A lot of what people argue is, well, is it a Hellenized religion? Is it Hebrew? Is it Aramaic? Right. Is it some ancient Canaanite? Is it Phoenician? And what we're looking at is all the leftover stuff that you guys don't look at. The fringe. This is the leftovers. We're looking at all the weird little cracks.
Everyone wants to hyperfixate on the Jewish and the Hebraic connections, but what about the Thracian? What about the Phoenician? What about the Greek? Right? It's all right there.
That was what I was talking about in my last video that I pre-recorded. Was like everyone's looking at the Old Testament. Everyone's looking at like the Babylonians, the Egyptians, trying to figure out what influences Christianity, Christian theology. Nobody looks at the actual geographical location where the Christian empire is located, the Byzantine Empire, which before it became the Byzantine Empire, before we call it that, before Constantine, that little 200-year period when Rome is still located in Rome, right? Before they moved the capital. But Christian theologians, the church fathers, are in that part of the world. Phrygia, Thrace, Northern Macedonia. So why doesn't anybody look at what's the religion of that place?
Yeah,
and you look at it, and you get Sabbatios, you get Dionysus, you get Orphism, and then you start noticing, whoa, a lot of this stuff looks like the same, very similar to Christian theology. And it's like any other part of the world, India, China, whatever, it doesn't matter. Pick any part of the world, and you'll look at the ancients and how the ancient stuff influences the next generation influences the next generation, and it's all geographical. But for some reason, Phrygia and Thrace can't influence Christianity? It's the same part of the world. Like, why wouldn't that be the case?
Yeah.
Same language, same Greek language,
No, so. And you raise a really interesting point. Like, people want to create this narrative, right, that excludes all of this. And we're just having fun exploring it, right? And we want to just talk about, like, look, there's all this kind of stuff already happening here, right? If you want to draw a connection, that's for you to draw. But this is what's clearly going on. And it's really important. Like, I was mind blown the other day when you were on Myth Vision with Dr. Carl Ruck in Ammon. And when he was talking about his views on Christianity, and he was like, it doesn't matter about the event that spawns it, even though he does believe that there was possibly a crucifixion of some kind of figure. The point for him was that Christianity is clearly a Byzantine religion that comes out of Byzantine culture, that's written in Greek, that has all of these trappings, right? That presents all of these myths. And who better to say that than the classicist expert philologist, right?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And go ahead, Dia.
Well, I'm going to tell you, so talking about weird stories of the Bible, New Testament, a lot of that's the Hellenization, but the Old Testament, you got weird stories there too. And they take on a different complexity. You could see it as being old world and new world, these stories, some of the wilder stories, because before today I was looking up some wild stories, and some of the crazier ones are in the New Testament, I would say.
Yeah, what we see, I think, in a lot of the Old Testament is this euhemerization. So what we're seeing is that the Jewish people are reacting to all of the mythologies and the religions of the people around them, okay, and all of the different cults that are all clear influence on the Israeli people, you know, and they're responding to it, they're transforming it, they're either incorporating it. So they're taking these clear figures who are gods in other traditions and turning them into heroes of their tradition. You know, like look at something like Samson. Samson is Heracles. You know,
right,
like
exactly. It's no doubt about
Melkart. Like it's so blatant. It's almost on the nose, right? And Neil, you've done this so many times. Like you could probably run a list of these kind of figures in the Bible.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. When you look, I did a video about the Sanko-Niathan theogony that they supposedly found in a temple, and Philo of Biblos translated into Greek. Whatever the truth is about that, when you look at this text, it lines up with the Old Testament Torah Genesis story, but like instead of El, you have Saturn, Kronos, but like you still have the same stuff, the same stories are there. It's just instead of having characters and people that are prophets or patriarchs, they're just gods. So there's something going on there.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that kind of Saturn Kronos connection, because this brings me to another conspiracy that I want that Dion kind of turned me on to. And that's this idea that what is going on in the Bible and that what occurred originally is sort of this familial battle story that we see across these various different mythologies. Okay. So in the Kronos story, right, you have Kronos slays his father and takes the scepter, becomes the king, ushers in peace, creates this golden age. But eventually they become a tyrant, you know, and they foresee the future where their children are going to overthrow them. So what do? They go out, they're going to swallow and consume all of their children. But Rhea prevents this. She protects Zeus, right? She sends her off to go stay with the goat, Almathea, right? And then Zeus kind of comes of age. He drinks that magic goat milk, and then he goes and he kills, right, Kronos. And he takes the scepter and he becomes the new king. And then he takes Rhea as his wife, right? And so that is kind of this primordial story. Now imagine you have a similar thing going on with El and Asherah and then Yahweh, right?
Wow.
So El and Asherah are the Elohim. They're the pair at the beginning, right? But eventually El becomes corrupted and Yahweh has to destroy them. But he decides he doesn't want to stay with his mother in this version. He wants to eradicate his mother and his father. Just take it all for himself.
Wow, that's interesting. There's a couple questions that I think are interesting. Samantha, thank you for the super chat. Jesus and Krishna or Buddha? I'm guessing it's comparing both of them to Jesus. What do you guys think?
There's also a
lot to say about that.
There are so many conspiracies that go deep with this. You see this a lot within the East, and a lot of people who are influenced by Eastern ideas. It's this belief that, you know, that the Bible and the Jesus story and like a lot of these Indian stories are actually connected. So you'll see things like, you know, where people will draw these parallels to where Jesus is actually Krishna. He's an incarnation of Vishnu. And they'll look for parallels in these books like the Sri Bhagavatam or, you know, the Mahabharata and all this stuff. And you get a ton of this. You also have things like the Manichaeans that come in who incorporate a lot of Eastern religious ideas. Like they see the Buddha as a divine being in his own right, as a prophet, right? And we don't know a ton about them. So there's all of this conspiracy, but there's clearly a lot more connection with the East than people are talking about, right? Like St. Thomas goes to India, right? You know, there's a very early connection there. And a lot of these people on the Eastern side are interpreting these Christian ideas through their own lens, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you know, if I could say, there's people that make pilgrimages to this day to Kashmir to where they consider Jesus' tomb. That a lot of traditions where he doesn't die on the cross, or it's Judas that dies on the cross, or he's resurrected, or what have you. And he goes to India, and they got a tomb there where to this day people make pilgrimages.
Oh yeah, and famously, there's these stories of when the first Portuguese missionaries started to arrive in India, they found Christian monastics. They looked more like sadhus, but they were Christian monastics, and they were preaching the gospel of Thomas. So there was a Christian tradition already there.
Look at the Manichaeans. They have Jesus,
Buddha, Mani.
Jesus, Buddha, and Mani are the three main prophets. This is a religion that's going all the way to China.
Yeah,
you can find Manichaeans in China and India. So the Jesus being influenced by people in the East is one thing, but also on the flip side of that, you can go to India and you can find Buddhist statues there that predate Christianity. There were Buddhists in Alexandria, Egypt, and there's another way we know that is by looking at the text of the Mauryan king Ashoka the Great, where he decrees. He erects these pillars all over the world that say, Antiochus, Ptolemy. These are Seleucid and Ptolemaic kings way before Christianity. And he's telling these kings, make sure you send the doctors, make sure when I send people out to your lands, you provide them with doctors and healthcare. So you have 200 years before Jesus, you have Buddhist, or I should say Vedic, because there's like they're very blended at this time period.
Well, it's really
Vedic people talking about healthcare, universal healthcare.
Ashoka is a very interesting figure, and he's very much, while he is coming out of that Vedic tradition, he establishes himself as a Buddhist. Okay, and he does this as a form of India has this really interesting feature of extreme religious acceptance, and a lot of it comes out of this period of the Ashokan and the Mauryan successive dynasties, and then later often with the Muslim dynasties. There is this integration, and there's an allowance for a lot of variation. What's really cool about Ashoka is that he's a Buddhist and he erects Buddhist statues, he talks a lot, but he has philosophers and he promotes ideas from tons of different faiths. And like Jainism thrives at this time, and so does Hinduism, and so do a lot of like reaction other ideas. Like anyway, really interesting.
Right. What I was going to say is that Ashoka, we were talking about in a husbandry episode we did last week, and we mentioned a little bit, he's one of the first persons that set up veterinarian hospitals, due to his relationship with animals.
He was obsessed with healthcare for some reason.
Oh, yeah, well, he wanted to help animals too. He's like, hey, we got to take care of them. And another thing, we have an episode coming up that we're going to talk about that deals with the Buddhist relationship with Egypt, Meroitic Egypt, and the Tocharian script. Because what happened at a certain point in time, the Egyptians adopted a Buddhist trade language through the trade routes and helped unify the tribes there in Lower Egypt or Upper Egypt, and that was in the Meroitic period. And it was one of the queens was Medea that we talk about, a snake queen that was a Kandake or a Candace. And so they had a Buddhist script because they realized it was efficient because they were using hieroglyphics and Demotic script,
Wow.
So there's so much trade going on there between the Buddhists. Is that the gymnosophists as well? They call them gymnophysists.
Naked philosopher. That means in Greek.
Yeah,
right.
Gymnosophist.
There's many different ideas of who those people could be. They could have been Buddhists. They could have been yogis. They could have been a version of Shaivite sadhus. We're not 100% sure.
I think Vedic philosopher is a good way to.
Yeah.
Because
what I was going to say is that you have so many different philosophers at this period that are practicing this, going out into the wilderness, to study. Like this is just a very common thing, and you have many traditions. I just want to highlight it's not uniform, right?
Yeah. But yeah.
What's cool is that there is dialogue there, right? Like Alexander brings the gymnosophists back with him. And there's a lot of scholars who believe that a lot of the Christian monastic tradition comes out of the Buddhist, right? They get the shaving of the head, they get the dietary restrictions and the clothes from these gymnosophists, because that is the essence of them, is this restriction, living this very modest middle life, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to find the actual text, but like, if anyone doubts that, like, there's so much evidence that the world was more globalized than you think. There's tens of people from Indian culture in the Greco-Roman lands, all the way as far as like, Cyrene. Basically, you have a pillar erected there in Brahmi, the Brahmi, which is basically Sanskrit. So you have that all the way in the west, and then like we just mentioned in the east, we have Alexander traveling out there. You have the Greco-Bactrian kingdom right on the Indus River, right there, Greek. You have statues of Shiva in Greek, and you have this is way before Christianity comes along. So there's already so the idea that there can't be any influences from Buddha or Krishna on Jesus is nonsense. It's just nonsense at that point. Now, just to be able to point and say which part it is, you can't. But the idea is very much possible. You can't say it's impossible.
It's pretty simple. Let's start with the basic breakdown. We got a K, an R, an I, an S, and H. R, do you want to put a C in front of it? R, and K, and a C. What? Krish. What? That ain't the same to you? I mean, how much?
Now, this is something that Manly P. Hall points out. He says he thinks there's a connection there. Linguists will say, well, Krishna, the Christos, the Messiah, comes from that Mosiach. It just
etymologies, sure.
Yeah. So, but like the idea that somebody might be thinking of Krishna as they're writing a story about the Christ. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I follow you on that.
Is that a virgin birth too? I'm not sure. Is Krishna a virgin birth?
Yes,
no, I don't think so. Is it?
Yeah, no. Krishna's a virgin birth.
Oh, I didn't know that. What's the birth of Krishna? I have no idea.
Oh gosh.
I know there's different stories and all that stuff. To be honest, I'm not sure.
And is Radha Mary? Is Radha Mary at that?
In one of the stories, I think it's in one of the Vedic texts where, like the Rig Veda, it's just Krishna is not born. Krishna is eternal. In fact, Krishna, in that Brahma, the creator Brahma, is actually from the mind of Krishna. And that's not Krishna in this text. It's actually what's the not Indra? Is it Indra? The other word for Krishna, which is something else. Krishna.
Yeah, the word for Vishnu, which
Vishnu.
is
there it is. There it is.
His divine form.
That's what I should say. Vishnu, the creation story, is that Brahma, who's the creator, was from the mind of Vishnu, who's eternal. So there is no birth basically in Vishnu. But I know there's later stories that Krishna.
There are many different ways to interpret this, and the Indian traditions generally allow for a wide variety. Okay, but like the one that like the basic idea, you have this an easy way to think about it that's general is the Trimurti, which is you have the three primary deities, which is Brahma, as you brought up, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and then Shiva. The destroyer. Right. And this is mostly comes out of the Smarta tradition. Okay. But this is this idea that these three forces keep each other in balance. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is that preservation force, okay, it actively participates in the creation of the universe, in the saving of the universe, right? So to preserve, it reincarnates and it comes into the world. So you have Vishnu coming again and again and again. All of these he comes as a dwarf, he comes as a fish, he comes as Krishna, he comes as Rama. There are many different incarnations. In some traditions, they believe that the Buddha is an incarnation of Vishnu. That's some traditions they believe Jesus, right? Is in
the Dhammapada, Buddha says, "I am Krishna." He says, "I am Vishnu." He just straight out says it. So that is such an important thing for connecting Buddhism to Hinduism. Is that Buddha becomes kind of like, in the sense of Jesus is like the turning away from the old Pharisaic Judaism or Sadducee Judaism, whereas Buddha, just like Jesus, is turning away from the Hindu Vedic priesthood and starting up a. They both are like the Buddhism is what to Hinduism, Christianity is to Judaism. They're very much similar. They both come out of their traditions.
Yeah, that's a fair way to think about it. It's just more on a philosophical and practical level, at least in the earliest sense, because the Buddha is very much reforming and like the grand innovation of the Buddha is the middle way, right? He rejects the ritualism of the Brahmins, which is the people who are practicing the classic Vedic religion, but he also rejects the extremism that you find in Jainism and other texts, which these are people who are practicing the austerities, who are starving themselves and trying to achieve this divine perfection. The Buddha kind of balances them out. But what's also interesting here, though, is like what you're seeing is that there's a political discussion going on, and there's kind of this infighting going on across history, right? So one of the ways in which, like for a long time, Buddhism kind of dominates India, but then you have this Hindu revival that comes out of this like Sanskrit grammar and out of this Vedantic philosophy, which then starts to kind of, they take some of the ideas of the Buddha and they start to elaborate on them and reflect them through their own texts, right? And you get this new innovation. This is where you get people like Adi Shankaracharya and this whole idea of monism, right? Or like in he would say something like neti neti, this idea that God is absolutely one and can't be anything, right? It's not this, not that, you know? It's that absolute, undivisible, perfect Brahman, you know? And like this kind of comes as a reaction to Buddhism, right? You know, so there's this flourishing of all these philosophical traditions in India. But what's also interesting, just to get us back to Christianity, is this idea of the Trimurti, right? The three deities, right? This image of these three divine figures again happens, right? The mother, father, and the child, but also the force of destruction, the force of preservation that appears into the world, and the force of creation itself. And you see this reflected in a lot of the Christian understanding, right? This understanding of you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, you know? So
yeah, it's interesting.
And the Holy Spirit can sometimes be taken as a female entity because they can't erase the female. Back to what we're talking about. She's there. She ain't going nowhere. And so the Holy Spirit can take on a female connotation in different myths. And that's why you have Mary, you know. Mary's very popular in Christianity, that some people just worship Mary.
Yeah. You'll see this in like middle-aged Christian texts where some priest somewhere will write down like, and they were raiding our town, and I cried out to the Virgin, help us. Like it didn't say Jesus or God or Father. He cried out to the Virgin to help him. So like that's early on. You see that.
Or the beloved John. What about the beloved John? Because there's in several traditions, in the Johannine traditions, it's his partner John that, you know, that lays on his bosom, that he had a special loving relationship that the other disciples were jealous of, is worshipped as a true soter. And then with other people, it's John the Baptist.
Yeah,
you know,
Mandeans.
Yeah, they believe he's the true one. You know what's wild? I do a lot of reading about Mandeans in the modern times, and it's tough for them because they do this water baptism, and they're supposed to do it several times a day, where they have to go underwater and baptize, and they're supposed to go with rivers. But modern Mandeans in the modern times, so the bishop of their order put out a decree that, well, you could use tap water as long as it's running under the sink. So I think it's like 5 times a day Mandeans have to baptize, and just like Muslims will go do call a prayer, Mandeans will go to the bathroom and turn on the sink, and that's how they'll pray. They got to get that running water.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's really fascinating, actually.
Dion brought up something really cool.
You know what I think about this though, because Heraclitus, I was just looking, and this is what I'm actually looking up right now. He writes that the world order the cosmos, is the same of all. No God nor man did create, but it ever was and is, will always be, an ever-living fire, kindling in measures and being unquenched in measures. Talking about the universe. The universe is a combination of opposites, right? And that those opposites, everything's in a flux, and it's always going to be that way. Nothing ever will be. There are no
resolve.
Yeah, and so the idea of water being the savior from what? From the universe? Like, you think, is this what the Gnostics are talking about with the demiurge and having the logos, and the logos is that principal part that's constant in all things? And like, I wonder, because these philosophers influence theology. They go back, like, it seems like there's a duel happening over time from the ancient world to now, where you have these religions and you have these priests, you have like the Hierophant of Eleusis, and they don't get along with the philosophers in Athens. They hate each other. The Hierophant of Eleusis is constantly charging the philosophers with sacrilege and sending them to condemning them to death. The philosophers have this like rational mind. They're trying to figure out what this universe is, but they bounce off each other. And then you end up getting better theologies as a result. That fight of opposites creates the better religion at the end.
Right.
100%. And it's interesting you bring that up, because this is a huge pet peeve of mine, because you see this in both the Greek tradition and in the Indian traditions. It's this, they don't understand, like they want to limit what a philosopher is. They want a philosopher to not be religious. In the Greek tradition, they're saying they're entirely all about this intellectual, early scientific approach, and they're devoid from religion. Not true, right? Look at someone like Heraclitus, who you just brought up. He spends 90% of his life in the temple of Artemis, right?
Yeah.
He's an extraordinarily religious man. And he would not see any difference between his philosophy and his religious praxis. They are the same, Did you
know that Pyrrho, the founder of the school of skepticism, he was a student of Aristotle, first of all. And Aristotle sent him away with Alexander the Great to travel the world. He met with him. He's one of the philosophers that met with the gymnosophists, came back, went to Alexandria as a newly found city, started this new school of skepticism, very rational philosophical school. Do you know that he was a high priest?
Wow.
You don't know that. He was a high priest. He was given the title of Pontifex, or that's Latin version of it, but like whatever the Greek version is, he was given that title of high priest by the city of Alexandria.
It's something they don't want to,
some sort of religious rite that he was a part of.
And like,
he's a skeptic philosopher.
Exactly.
Well, you said fire earlier. You're talking about fire. It reminds me of one of these Bible stories, because I still got to throw out one of these stories, because I'm sure people are expecting to hear something. What happened to Judas after he betrayed Jesus? There's multiple versions. One version is he hangs himself. And another version, he falls down in a field. Well, Papias, I don't know if you know the Bishop Papias of yeah. He writes about, he says that, well, what done Judas in was his penis swelled up.
Really?
It enlarged. He talks about it got so big and enlarged.
Oh, I've heard this story before, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And Judas swells up, and he smelled really bad. Yeah, and what's funny, because there's a tradition of saints having, it's called the odor of sanctity, where their tombs smell.
And they can't be saints anymore when that happens.
Yeah. It's like a flower smell.
There's occasions where people who qualified as saints, when they died, because of the funky smell of their bodies, they couldn't.
Exactly.
They were sinful. So they were hiding the sins the whole time. They're not a real saint.
Yeah. And so supposedly he smelled so bad that even after he died, people wouldn't move into Judas's house. And the tradition of his penis swelling up and spitting out fire is now a modern tradition in a church in the Philippines. Because there's some Philippine orders that does some radical stuff. Like there's one order there that
crucifixion, right?
Yeah, they crucify themselves, as well as they have that one where Jesus is in a dress. But in this other one, they make these giant effigies of Judas, and they put fireworks come out of his penis, and they have this parade once a year.
Wow.
And then they burn the effigy of Judas, but they have a giant penis and the fireworks come out of it.
And by the way, Papias is one of the people who cites a cue or some sort of missing sayings of Jesus. So if he knew about this text that we lost, I wonder where he's getting this idea from. Maybe he's got these alternate stories about Judas flying around too.
Right. You know, and what we're looking at too is like the Syriac, the Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, some of them, and like when Jesus was a kid. Like we're going to be talking about an episode this weekend about the eunuchs and some of the recipes for creating eunuchs in the Bible. But one of the things was, you know, the recipes they gave him was for 3 years to do a transition. That you've heard of Shadrach. You heard the term Shadrach from the Bible. Did you know Shadrach was a eunuch?
No, I didn't know that.
Didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know he was an effeminate little eunuch.
Wow.
That was brought to the priest of the eunuchs as a little boy.
I know a lot of priests were eunuchs, though. That I do know. That was part of the ancient world where the high priest was preferred, and I'm not specifically talking about any like religion or temple, but like your priest was preferably a eunuch because the eunuch has no desires anymore. They cut off their desires. Apparently, I don't know. I'm just saying.
Maybe not, huh?
But yeah, I don't think that's the case.
I think
that's what they try to say it was, but I don't think that's the case.
I think a lot of it goes back again to that idea of this divine kind of hermaphrodite character, right? You see this in a lot of the mysteries where people have to become bigendered. They have to transition across that. They have to move across that gender barrier, right? To get the totality of the all, right? Central part of the Dionysian mysteries is to experience that panic. You got to embrace everything, right? So that includes both sides of the gender. So often you'll see these priests and priestesses who are non-binary, right? Or who are trans. Like it's a very common thing cross-culturally,
right?
You know?
Real quick, I just want to point something out. I want people to see this. This dude Pyrrho of Elis, extremely important for so many things, right? He was the student of Aristotle, right? He travels with Alexander the Great to India to meet with the Gymnosophists. I already mentioned that, right? He finds a school of skepticism that basically says that you should suspend judgment. You should not have dogma on anything. Like dogma is bad. Doctrines are bad. Like these are his ideas. This is where skepticism comes from him. Check this out, right? Where is it? So you would think he's like some sort of atheist, anti-religious guy. Look at this. He served as the high priest at the temple of Zeus at Olympia. He was a high priest. So like a lot of times, and this is actually, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because a lot of these deep theological ideas come from skepticism, where skepticism actually brings you a more mature idea of what God is.
Well, you bring up a really interesting thing, because when you start to look at the magicians, what are they? Okay, these magical practitioners, they're a type of priest in a sense. They're medicine men and women, but really these are people who are engaging in almost a scientific type of praxis. And all across the ancient worlds, you have these figures. They're going out and they're making potions, right? They're trying, they're saving all this information. They're in the act of doing. So you get this kind of skepticism. You get this kind of understanding out of these forms of religion, out of these forms of spirituality, which are connected to the earth, which are connected to healing, right? Which are trying to actually bring about change in the real world, right? We have to remember that people are always as smart as they have been, Right. And that the smart doctors of now would have been medicine men and women doing drugs and cutting roots in the past.
Check this out, though. The reason why I'm bringing up Pyrrho, right? This comes back to the topic of this video. Think about this. I'm gonna throw out a wild theory right now. Because think about this. What is Judaism? It's the religion of the Old Testament, right? I'm just being real brief about real basic. Like it's obviously more nuanced than that, right? But just the religious text of Judaism is the Tanakh, the Torah, the Old Testament, right? Well, what's the story about how these books came about? Well, a lot of it comes from Alexandria, Egypt, where you have in the Ptolemaic Empire, they're putting together a whole list of books from Canaan and putting together this canon of texts. Well, Alexandria, one of the biggest influences in Alexandria is Pyrrho. So it's like, could it be that Judaism is one of these branches of religion that come out of skepticism? Because think about this now. In Judaism, there is no, it's very skeptic about gods. First of all, Jews are charged with atheism by the polytheists. And you even have, like, for example, you have like Elijah taunting the priest of Baal and saying, "Where's your God at? Make him do something." Oh, he can't. That's right. He doesn't exist. These are like skeptic theologians. And another thing that the Sadducees, they have nothing on what hell or heaven is. They don't have anything about the afterlife because they don't know what it is. They don't claim to know. So I'm thinking, like, is the tradition of Judaism coming from a place of skepticism? Maybe.
I think you're onto something, right? But this connects to one of the theories that Dion brought up, which is that cult of Mars, the cult of the Temple of Mars, because this comes out of these philosophical military schools, okay? Because you got to remember, who are the philosophers advising? They're advising the generals and the emperors, right? This is the upper echelons of masculine society in these places. So to imagine that these kind of philosophies create this kind of patriarchal kind of Jewish sect that goes on to eradicate Asherah and eliminate the female, you know, it connects there. And this is where these people who believe in this Temple of Mars thing go.
Well, you know, I could take that a step further in that you said the name Elijah. Elijah, you can type in the references where he does this thing. It's you've heard of laying on hands to heal people. Well, they have a tradition of laying on boys, and that's what Elijah does. He lays down on top of a boy and mouth to mouth, face to face, does it 3 times to raise the dead boy. Elijah does that. And then Elijah has a disciple, Elisha. You know, you have Elijah and Elisha, spelled Elisha, I'm probably not pronouncing anything correctly. And he does the same thing, where he lays down on top of dead boys and brings them back to life. Even Paul does it. You could just falls out the window and Paul lays down on top of them and brings them back to life.
Right.
You know, and with the Elisha, there's another story where he's walking and some kids are making fun of him. You know, they're making fun of him. They say he's bald, his bald head. And you know what he does? He summons 2 bears to kill the kids. That's in the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, we got to have some weird Bible stories because I know some people came for that.
Yeah,
we'll give him something.
No, that's one of those, and that's one of the stories that Celsus talks about. When Celsus is criticizing the Jews and Christians, he's like, "Dude, your God is a monster. He sent she bears after
she bears
because they called his prophet a baldy." Even the Gnostics, Marcion of Sinop brings this up. He makes the same argument. He said, "There's no way that the Old Testament God is the good God, that good creator. He's not.
And you notice you said she bear. You said she bear. Why do they make it a she bear? I noticed that. Why is it a female?
I forgot about that.
Because that's a non-maternal instinct for the mother to kill the kids.
Oh,
we're back to the rib.
That's so crazy. You're so right about that. That's so true.
Right. And you talking about how evil this God is. This is also why look at who the Romans are identifying the Jewish God with. Saturn, right?
Yeah.
They're identifying him with the castrated, angry male, and
you have some Roman writers in the 2nd century BCE that think that it's Jupiter Sabbatios.
Yeah.
Right.
I showed that in my video. What was the guy's name? I'm pulling it up right now. It's from Valerius Maximus. He thinks that and there's a super chat about that. I just saw that. Hold on, let me pull it up. Yaku, thank you for your super chat. Bible is Sabbatian mysteries made into Platonic monism. The Bible characters have Bacchic names. Yaakov, Yosef, Sabbath, Rebecca, like Rebecca, Isaac. This is actually interesting because you have Tacitus saying that Tacitus thinks that when Pompey the Great raided the temple, they found a ivy diadem, and that's something that Bacchus would wear.
Right, right.
Is this some ancient version
the
of
crown
Bacchus?
of Jesus would have been? They're saying it would have been ivy.
But you also get that thing when they raid the Holy of Holies. What did they find but a man riding a donkey? Dionysus is always the man riding a donkey.
That was a different raid. That was Antiochus.
Yeah.
It gets raided again. So that's interesting too. Dionysus also rides the donkey. Amazing point. Then later on, 200 years later, after Antiochus raids the temple, Pompey the Great raids the temple. And what does he find? He finds an ivy diadem. That's it. So like a lot of these, and then Plutarch just comes out and says it. Plutarch just comes out and says the Jews worship an older form of Dionysus. That's been so it's not the free father of like ecstasy, and it's a different older tradition about Bacchus. That's whatever this version is, because you got to remember that in the ancient world you have the gods that have similar etymologies, but like their traditions are different, and they have different stories about them. They have different qualities about them, but they have the name shows up again. Apollo has different traditions about him. You know what I mean?
You know, you said Rachel and Isaac earlier.
That's what the person in the super chat.
All right, well, we're going to give you some weird stories. If I hear a name from the Bible, I'm going to give you a weird story about it. So Rachel talks to Leah, and Leah wants to get with Jacob. That's her husband, and that's her sister. And she tells her sister, "You can get with them for some mandrake root. You get a night with the husband for some mandrake root." And now, mind you, Jacob had already got with the servant girls to make babies, and that's what got him jealous, and they wanted babies. Let's talk about Jacob and his brother Esau. You know, Esau comes in from the field.
Esau sounds like a Bacchic chain too.
Yeah, comes in from the field, and he says, "Hey, what you cooking there?" And he goes, "I'm making the red soup." And they say it's red. It's a red drink. And he goes, "I'll trade you my birthright as the king, the king of Israel, future king of the whole thing. I'll trade you my birthright for some of that red soup, some of this red psychoactive drink." And he takes it, and they even make sure to tell you that it's red because it's Edom, the tribe of Edom, and it's a double entendre on the word red as well. And these are these psychoactive drinks, which could have been acacia or kermes or mollusk or, we got a different red, sarkion, sure. And so he goes back into the field, and at that point he goes to mom, and mom tells him, "Well, hey, it's time to get the birthright. So this is what I want you to do. We're going to cook a goat, and I want you to take it into Pops, Isaac." And he goes, "Well, Pops is going to know that it's not me because they're twins." And we talk a lot about twins being one masculine and one effeminate because we're going back to the original. This is the Garden of Eden, the rib and the gynomorph. Everything comes back to a male and female polarity that we're discussing. And so mom says, "Well, I want you to be the future leader, even though it's his birthright." And we even went to a soothsayer when she was pregnant, Rachel, because he was kicking in the womb. And she told him, "Well, hey, the first and that twin that comes out is not going to be the king as it should have been. It's the second one, the effeminate one." So while the older brother was out in the fields, the young twin was effeminate and stayed in the tents. And then so she cooks a magic goat for Pops and says, "Take this to him." And she says, "Well, he's going to know it's not me, because I'm not hairy." And Pops is blind. Isaac is blind. So what she does, she takes the goat skins and puts it around his neck and around his arms. So at that point, Jacob walks into the tent, gives the goat to his father. He eats it. And then the father fills him up and goes, "Oh, my son." It's his hairy son, with the goat skins on him. And he gives him his blessing, transfers a blessing to him. And then as soon as Esau comes back in the field, from the field, he's like, "Hey, what happened?" And Pops is like, "What happened? They tricked me." He goes, "Well, I can't give you the blessing anymore anyways because it's been drained from me." Like if it's actual power that he gives to him. And it's at that point that Jacob goes on to be, the boss man of everything and has sex with the servant girls. And then Rachel says, "Give me some mandrake roots and I'll let my sister get with them." And this is how you found that dynasty. So,
Oh, you know what? I just realized that Jacob's name. Jacob is Israel. The
Yeah,
name Jacob, Yaku. That's a Bacchic chant. And then the other one is Iwa. Is
Yeah,
that Eve? Like,
yeah.
it sounds like Bacchic chants happening here. And we know these are ancient, old Bronze Age traditions that are being retold and brought into new traditions. So it's like, could it be that this ancient Bacchic chants of Yake, like the name Yaakov is so close to the Bacchic chant Yaki. It's almost like, is his name based off the Bacchic chant itself?
And that's right. And they get James from that sometimes, and James and Jacob will be important later in the New Testament. And because you'll recycle characters and heroes and myths and archetypes, and a lot of times in the Bible, you'll have things show up in pairs of twos. You'll have a dual. Besides having a twin, you'll have the story told twice.
Yes. Yeah. Look at this. The name of Bacchus is actually, the older form of it is Yakos. Like, it's so close to Jacob. It's the same name, basically. That's the name of Dionysus. You know what I mean? And then look it says, was a minor deity of some cultic importance at Athens, connected to the Eleusinian mysteries. He perhaps originated as a personification of the ritual explanation Yaki. And like, Jacob is, if the Hebrew is Yaakov. So like, I don't know. I'm not an expert in linguists, but like, it's pretty damn close in my opinion. So
yeah, we're experts on nothing but having fun.
Yeah, exactly. Constellation Package says it seems to be very clear hardcore drugs are being used in God worship all over the place. The ultimate highest, but absolutely, it's just look at Soma and the tradition of the Vedic, and then Eleusinian mysteries. You do not get initiated unless you drink from the kykeon, which is a drug, which is a wine mixed with ergot, fermented grain with fungus, with mushrooms on it. So also, you're tripping on shrooms and wine at the same time.
Right. And like, what you start to notice when you study a lot of these mystery cults is that they're all associated with different drug concoctions and different gods. Like, for example, you generally see Hecate associated with the nightshades, right? And with dogs. And there's something going on there. There's a relationship there, right? When you look at mushrooms, they're always around the sacred cow and the cow feces, and the cow urine, right? These are things that you see coming up again. When you're looking at something like, when we look at the Bacchic mysteries, which we're just talking about, you see all these references to goat's milk, right? And the drinking and consumption of goat's milk. So and if you know anything about something like deadly nightshades, like Datura, right? These aren't psychedelics. These are deliriants. This is beyond hardcore. I do not recommend anyone try deadly nightshades.
I just noticed that you said that. The sacred cow is the first thing that Aaron wants to do when they're in the desert. He wants to pull out that golden calf and worship it.
Because I got a story for you about that.
Could it be that this is the Sabbatian mysteries? They're turning away from their old rites and starting... Like, is that what the story is telling you? Like, we come from these ancient Bacchic Sabbatian mysteries with the golden calf, but now we're better. Now we're more mature. Is that what's going on here? I don't know.
Let's talk about golden calf and Moses, because you talked about a drink, and we could talk a lot about different psychedelic herbs to put in that cup, from snake venoms to acacias to nightshades to this and that. I'm going to talk about something else that goes in the cup, and it's gold. We're going to talk about the golden calf. So Moses comes down, and they're worshiping a golden calf. You all know that story. You've heard that several times as a little kid. Tell me what happens next.
What happens next after they worship it or whatever? Moses comes down.
What's the first thing that happens? That after he gets pissed off?
Oh, he kills a bunch of them.
Nope. He makes them drink it. Really? He takes the golden calf and it's called strewn in water. He takes the golden calf and he throws it into the pot of hot water, and he makes the children of Israel drink the golden calf.
No way. No.
Yes. Way. And then a couple chapters later,
find this verse.
Moses does something else. Moses goes and he puts the blood on the horns of the altar. Because even though Moses got pissed about them drinking the golden calf, or worshiping the golden calf, mind you, he still put blood on the golden calf on a different calf a couple chapters later.
Here it is.
We're talking about the Serapis bull. And this gets into an older.
And by the way, Serapis is Bacchus.
Yeah. No, this is
the same god. Plutarch writes about this. Herodotus writes about this. That's the same god. It's just different traditions that develop, but they all come from the same sort of tradition and regime.
Sure. And in terms of this bull, we're getting to the different bull culture, pastoral culture. We know that there's mushrooms that grow in the dung. We know that, like with the ergot, we just did an episode last weekend where we talked about 20% of ergotized rye is converted into ergotamine in the cow's milk. And so with the bull worship, there's drinking of psychoactive milks, psychoactive urines, besides just slaughtering them for sacrifice purposes, are using them to thresh the wheat that you get the kykeon from, are using the shit to grow the mushrooms, are putting the blood on the horns, are putting the golden calf into water and drinking it.
Golden and purple mix, where you have the wheat, the blood, the body of the god, the Demeter, golden, then the purple, the wine, Bacchus, the vine, the grape. Those two become central to the mysteries, either the grain and vine. And there you go. There's your golden and purple.
You know the grain,
the two colors
of grain itself, the ergotized rye that grows on the grain, the claviceps purpurea, the word means purple.
Wow.
It's a burning purple. That's why it's called St. Anthony's fire, the condition you get from taking the ergot.
Yeah,
that's a burning purple as well as the mollusk.
Yeah, and those become the main colors of royalty, gold and purple.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I just want to read this out real quick. The Constellation Package, thanks for the super chat. I suppose we owe Chaldean magic practicing priests a debt of gratitude, the forerunners of today's scientific community. That's an interesting point. Because the Babylonians, Chaldeans they were astronomers, they were mathematicians. That's definitely a good point.
We got an episode this weekend that's going into Chaldean magic. But it's based on Ashpenaz. Ashpenaz was the prince of the eunuchs for Nebuchadnezzar. And the name means the horse's nose. Because part of what we talked in the last episode with the ergot, the back of the horse's hoof is called the ergot, which is also the thieves' language, is argoter. And you can use some of the horse mythologies and equestrian husbandry to unpack some of this stuff. And so
Ashpenaz... Slang comes from running through the fields, right, and gathering.
Yeah, the term slang is to take the tips off the wheat. And then there's a saying where Jesus does that. They go through the disciples and they get in trouble on the Sabbath when Jesus takes the tips off the wheat and he rubs them in the Syriac version. And that deals with getting the claviceps purpurea.
This is a good question. I wonder if there's any psychoactive cacti native to the Near East. Probably, right? Like out in the desert where there's a bunch of cacti. Do you think there's maybe something in the Near East?
Succulents. Well, there is something. It's called kagui, and that's in South Africa.
I knew that Dion was going to have an answer to that.
This ties into the Kohanim, to the priesthood of the Kohanim, because the people that use it in South Africa have the genetic that ties in with the Kohen priesthood, because they did their tests. Because Kohens have a certain genetic DNA, because you have the Aaronite priesthood and the Kohanite priesthood. And that's where you get the word Cohen, Cohen, or Kahan. And so they've done tests in South Africa, and there's a certain group of tribes, I think it's the Lemba, and they connect to the Cohens there. But what I was going to tell you about the Chaldean magic, the Chaldean.
Doesn't that mean purple, Cohen? Because Canaan means purple.
Well, I know Cohen means priest.
Okay.
Like teacher or priest. And also in Aramaic, it connects the Kahan. And also in like Genghis Khan is a Khan. It's the same. It's the same. Wow. KHN. It's just you're using different vowels. But what I was going to say about Nebuchadnezzar, he has a prince of eunuchs that's in charge of the Chaldean magic. And that's where they take Daniel and Shadrach and they put them through the 3-year initiation program of Chaldean magic.
Here it is right here. Canaan derived from the Hurrian language for the word purple, and the Greeks knew the Canaanites as Phoenicians, which is also mean. So that's why you have people always wonder, why are the Canaanites called Phoenicians? Well, they're actually the same. They mean the same thing in 2 different languages.
Yeah, yeah.
Canaan,
The purples.
purple for the Hittites and Hurrians, and then Phoenician is Greek. So that part of the world, of the Mediterranean world, that coastal area of the Mediterranean, those are the purple people.
Well, this all connects to, so one of the really cool theories that we discovered is by this guy Earl Lee. So Earl Lee looks right into the Bronze Age origins of all of these cults, and he traces it back to Minoan Crete. And specifically, he traces it to this purple mollusk production and this mushroom production. But what's interesting is that the mushroom production is not just normal mushroom production. It's at the center of a gigantic ancestral worship ceremony, and where they're inoculating dead bodies with these mushrooms and then consuming them as an act of eating the dead. And this kind of travels all across the area and influences all these different cults, from Sumer to Harappa to Egypt, right? And we see a lot of parallels, especially within the Egyptian. Like, remember when we were looking at, Dion, that the Osiris eating of the body there too? And weren't they doing something similar with the mushroom?
And they make Osiris cakes. They make little cakes based on, well, you know the story of how Osiris is chopped up into body parts. Well, they make the body parts into little hallucinogenic cakes, ergotized rye, and you can eat these little body parts.
If you look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's a Eucharist for Osiris.
Yeah,
Eat my cakes and drink the wine. Whoever takes part in this rite will have eternal life. I'm not kidding you. Like, you can look this up look it up in the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
They're called the mysterious cakes. I think Plutarch talks about it.
Yes. Plutarch says by definition, literally a Eucharist. I'm not even paraphrasing. And it says, drink the wine and eat the cakes. Whoever takes a part in these rites will have eternal life. It says it right in the text.
It's so amazing. And the point we're trying to make is that you have all of these different rites that are around transforming the dead, the beloved dead ancestor, into some kind of edible form, which can be ingested. And then it's understood when you're ingesting this, right? They see it in the same way that like the Catholics do. Like, you're ingesting the God. It's this entheosmos that's happening, right? So like with Osiris, right? They're making these little corn cakes. Sometimes they're even putting body parts in them, and then they're ingesting them, right?
Well, you know, they wrap them up in little sindons, in little medicated sindons, and sometimes they bury them. You know, and in terms of also the Eucharist, mentioning the Eucharist and the connection with the dead, you might see that they'll put a Eucharist in a dead person's mouth at a funeral. Are the coins on the eye? You know about the coins on the eye for the ferryman. Well, originally those could have been mushroom caps, or they were cakes of food, of psychoactive cakes. And now if they were mushroom caps, what would happen is the spores would use the decomposing body to sprout mushrooms, and that would be a form of a Eucharist.
Wow.
You know, there's a guy who put...
Go ahead. Say it snappy. What were you going to say?
I would just since we're into the realm of the Eucharist, we have to get into one of our most shocking ones that we discovered. There's this tradition of people who believe that the Eucharist was sperm, and that these people were performing a rite of communion called spermatophagy, or what is it?
Spermatophagy.
Yeah, spermatophagy, where they're ingesting the sperm to achieve a form of gnosis. And like, you really see this get pushed in like the 19th century with this really interesting cultist named Georges Le Clement de Saint Marc. And he's a Freemason, a Rosicrucian, and also a designer of like Zeppelins and dirigibles. But he writes this book, The Eucharist, where he posits this, and he insists on this until he dies, that this is the central rite. It ruins his career. It shames him, the whole nine, right?
Well, and to take it a step further, he believes that the semen communion is something that's called chain transmission, that's been passed down since Jesus Christ, and that the apostles took it and they pass it down, and that each person has semen up to this point. So if you're ingesting the semen of the priest to this day, they think it's an unbroken chain going back to Jesus' semen.
Wow. Now, I just want to throw this out, and not to like derail what you're saying right here, but this is Egyptian Book of the Dead, right? Now, anyone can look this up. It's from the Papyrus of Nu in the British Museum, number 10,477, sheet 16. So I'm not just making this up. Like, you probably can't see that shit. Whatever. You can look it up. You can hear what I said. Pause the video. Go back and look it up. And it says, this is the English translation. There's a whole hymn for Osiris. And then at the end it says, this shall be said over a figure of the deceased one, which shall be placed in a model of the boat of the sun. And behold, he that reciteth shall be washed, and shall be ceremonially pure, and he shall have burnt incense before Ra, and shall have offered wine and cakes, and a roasted fowl for the journey in the boat of Ra. Now for every coup for whom such things are done shall have an existence among the living ones, and he shall never perish, and he shall be like unto that of the holy God, and no evil thing whatsoever shall attack him. So you literally have a Eucharist being done that gives you eternal life. All the way back in the, 2500 BCE when this was put together?
And so they call it the Book of the Dead, but other people can call it the Book of Going Forth or Coming Forth.
Right. That's exactly what it is, actually.
Yeah.
And what's wild, too, when we look at this idea of the semen communion, right? This is something you see in a lot of these pagan traditions. Like, I think about Heracles and Ganymede. Ganymede offering Heracles his cup of life.
The cup, the nectar of the gods.
The nectar of the gods.
His role in the heavens is the cupbearer. And think about it, he's chosen as the beautiful young boy that Zeus is in love with. And he's the cupbearer of the gods.
A lot of people believe that the naked boy in Mark 51:52 is Ganymede, and that Jesus is ingesting his ambrosial nectar.
There's some sort of ritual aspect of that I think, which, by the way, it's the whole point of this stream right now. We're throwing wild theory like that. Like, who knows? Like, we don't know what Mark was trying. We don't know what Mark was getting at. We don't know who Mark's audience is. Not us. Mark's audience is people in the first century that are speaking Greek in that part of the world. Their idea of what this meant is something that we might have lost by now. So you might be right. Like, this might be some cultic language going on here.
Are you familiar with the Syriac and the foreskin?
Otherwise, why would Mark put that in there as extra information? Some little kid just ran by when Jesus was getting arrested. He just ran past naked and just nothing to see here. Let's not talk about this anymore.
With a sindon, too. They don't just use wrap. They use medicated wrap.
Right.
Go ahead, Dion. Yeah.
Oh, no, keep going.
No, I cut you off. You said something about Syrian. I'm sorry. I do this all the time. Something about a Syrian something.
Oh, no. I was going to talk about the foreskin in the Syriac. Yeah. So they talk about when they take off his foreskin on the 8th day, they bottle it up in myrrh and spikenard, and they save it. And that is what they anoint him with when they anoint his feet. When Mary anoints his feet, it's his foreskin.
Wow.
That's in the Syriac. They say that they preserve his foreskin and anoint with it.
You want to know
normally they would bury the foreskin.
You want to know something crazy about that? You said 8th day, right?
Yeah.
So in that same part of the world, this is in Phoenicia. This is actually, the Temple of Eshmun is like 45 minutes away from Nazareth. It's right there. Eshmun, the Phoenician healer god, and I'm using encyclopedia.com. This is well cited. Look at all the sources for right here are down here. Look at the bibliography. Load it up. This is really good source. By the way, it's really under written about, though. Someone needs to do some more work on Eshmun. But anyways, Phoenician healer god, later identified with Asclepius, patron of medicine. Okay, we're talking about all these medical raps and stuff. His name connects him with oil. Shmon in Hebrew is oil. But it also means Shmone is 8 in Hebrew. So his name is a pun. It could be 8 or oil. So the one who heals, look at this, the one who heals with oil, the anointer, but the 8th day. So check this out. He's the 8th son of this god Siddiq, which some people think has to do with the order of Melchizedek.
Yeah.
Eshmun's was the son of Siddiq, the 8th son. Look at this, Eshmun. The number 8 was the sign of election of special destiny. So anyways, the reason why I brought that up is because the whole idea of the eighth day, Sunday, right? And what's the other thing is, oh yeah, Jesus' gematria 888. Like this,
Right.
there might be some cultic connections going on with this Beirut version of Asclepius, whose name is Eshmun.
What's interesting is I immediately think of something that Dion was talking about or showed me, which is the cult of Melkart, right? Which is connected to the Melchizedek priesthood, right? When we were looking at the Melkart rites, they also do this elaborate king ritual, okay? Where what they would do is they would take the king.
Oh shit! Oil walks on water. Sorry, that's a good point though.
Right, and they would take him and they would shave him down, cut all the hair off of his body, and purposely cut him. Then they would take him and they would douse him in these oils, right? And then they would take him and wrap him in medicated wraps. This would put him into a death state where he would be dead. And then the female priestess would have to mount him with an alabastron. And if he woke up, and they would be slapping him and screaming, if he woke up, then he came back to life and he could stay the king.
Dude, and look at this. So just to go back to Eshmun real quick.
And that's Melkart is Eshmun. Melkart.
There's a temple. I'm so glad you said that. There's two temples to Eshmun that exist. That are still around. One of them's in Beirut. The other one's in somewhere in Syria. It's a temple of Melkart / Eshmun. They get rolled into one, which is so important because think about like what the Christ is. The idea of the Christ is like this syncretic idea of a healer, hero, son of God, demigod. Like it's like all these ideas are sort of like jumping towards into what the Christ becomes.
Well, Melkart's sacred object is an olive tree, and he has a donkey, and he's the one that finds the purple mollusk. So a lot of the original Christian myths,
dogs,
they're coming out of the Melkart myth mixed with the southern Canaanite stuff down there. Yeah.
Wow. Wait. Look at this. Eshmun is called. The verbs linked to Eshmun is personal names stressing healing functions of the god, protects, saves, salvation. So the reason why this is, if you actually look at some of the Phoenician kings, there's two of them that have the name Eshmunetzer. Eshmunetzer 1, Eshmunetzer 2. That name literally translates to Eshmun saves, Eshmun salvation. So there's a salvation god who heals, anoints. What do you think the word Christ means? It's to dab with oil. They're the same thing, basically. Just a Greek version of it.
And we're trying to stretch. How much of a stretch do you think it is that the people in Galilee are influenced by what's happening in Tyre?
40 miles away. Yeah.
Okay.
Think right about there. This. Yeah. Look, actually, I'm going to do something right now. I'm going to pull up on a map the Temple of Eshmun and show you how close it is to Nazareth. So, Temple of Eshmun. Here, I'm going to share my screen right now. I got Google Earth pulled up. Look at this. This is so important, I think, because we're talking about the same part of the world, right? We're talking about the same. Look at Temple of Eshmun right there. We have it. Now look at this. If I zoom out, oh wait, am I upside down? I'm upside down. Why did that happen?
That's so weird.
I don't know why.
We never see the map orientated in this direction. I'm so used to seeing like that classic. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know why I'm upside down. That makes it wait. Why am I upside down, guys? What the hell? All right. Just whatever.
It's the same map.
For whatever reason, I'm upside down. But look at Temple of Eshmun. Where'd it go, by the way? Look, there's Beirut. Here's your Mount Hermon right there. So it's the same part of the world, basically. You know what I'm saying? Like it's the same thing.
Exactly.
And in all those mounts there, they have mythologies that go along with this stuff, which is Mount Moriah, Mount Carmel, all the little mounts there. Mount Hermon.
Isn't it interesting that we have
Eshmun?
Well, this brings up another interesting conspiracy. Some people believe that the Samaritans are actually practicing the original version of Judaism, or at least a more, original form, one that was not influenced by the Babylonian exile, and they're situated around Mount Hermon, and they believe that Hermon is Sinai, so there's some interesting stuff going on there, right?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, and if you actually look into the sources for Eshmun, the temple is in use all the way up until the time of like Constantine. Basically, there's reports of, I forgot which emperor it was. I think it was who was the one that rules right after the crisis of the 3rd century? Septimus Severus. Septimus Severus traveled to Phoenicia or Lebanon to get baptized in the Temple of Eshmun. The thing about the temple, if you look up the Temple of Eshmun, it's got pools and baths everywhere. It's all about it's a temple of Asclepius, basically. It's like the whole purpose to go there is to wash yourself and get clean and heal yourself. That's like if you go to the Temple of Eshmun, it's just baths and like little like mikvahs everywhere. So
right.
So it's very famous for that. Which is what do you think baptism comes from? Probably
exactly. And this is what they also they have the sacred rites of baptism that are being done in the Melkart Eshmun cult. Okay. And they also have psychedelic fish, right? At least these dream fish that are being housed and bred at the temple site for the, and then you have Jesus who's doing these baptism rites and eating fish, like there's something going on there.
The agape love feast. Yeah, we did a episode about that, about how they'd go down into the catacombs in the early Christian church, would have orgies down in the catacombs with this in the communal meal that would mirror the Last Supper. All the elements are possibly hallucinogenic elements because they had little cakes, rye cakes. They had honey. They had a fish, and the fish could be Sarpa, Salapa Sarpa, Salema porgy. It's a dream fish that grows off the coast right there, Mediterranean, from Turkey down to Israel.
Oh, and look at the Book of Tobit. The Book of Tobit, the angel Raphael tells him to get the gall out of the fish, and it'll heal your blindness.
Oh,
yeah. So there's obviously the fish.
Yeah, help you to see. Yeah, to see. Yeah, to make the dreams. It's called the dream fish to help you to see.
Yeah, look at this. The Temple of Sight remained a place of pilgrimage into the classic antiquity during the Roman Empire until the advent of Christianity, when the cult of Eshmun was banned during the persecution. So it was still around, and a Christian church was built at the temple site across the street. There's a church there now, and look at this: a Roman colonnade was built in the 3rd century for Septimus Severus. So the Roman villa showed a period of renewed relative importance for the city during the period of Phoenicia under the Roman rule. So you can see how it's still famous even in the 3rd century. That's from. So I got to get this book.
Now, whoever cited Eshmun Addis? Is Eshmun Addis?
Well, yes. So now this is going to be confusing. I already said that Eshmun is. We already know Eshmun is Asclepius. Like, it's all over the sources. But here's why he's also Addis. The story of Eshmun. Get this. Just buckle up for this. You want to know what the story is? This is in Phoenician. Eshmun is a beautiful young youth, the 8th son of Siddiq. Siddiq is Jupiter. He's the god of justice. He's the son of Saturn, Kronos, one of the sons of Saturn. Siddiq has 7 sons called the Kabieri. The 8th son with a different mother who's immortal. So Eshmun is born of a mortal woman, and he's a shepherd. And one day, Aphrodite comes up and finds him and sees how beautiful he is. Here's where the Addis story kicks in. She invokes him to castrate himself for her, which he does. He bleeds out and dies. That's Addis. And then after he dies, she mourns over him. Astarte, I'm sorry, I said Aphrodite, but Astarte, Aphrodite, same thing. She mourns over the dead body of Eshmun and then rises him up into heaven, makes him into a god, which the text actually says turns him into Asclepius, and then he comes back as the healer god. So he dies from castration and then resurrects. So not only is it, so we have this healing Asclepius connected with Attis, and then this is what people need to understand is early Christians in this part of the world, the Nicene preacher is the perfect example, identified Jesus with Attis. You have the Nicene hymn. I have it right here, actually. The Nicene hymn, where they take the Homeric hymn to Attis, and they cross off the name Attis and put Jesus on there. So it's all there. Like there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle floating around. You just got to put it together.
And the thing with Asclepius is part of it is the relationship with the snakes. The snake is how he heals. The
rod of Asclepius.
Yeah, yeah.
Like Moses holds up that same staff,
which is the serpent. You know about how he puts the serpent on the rod to heal the tribe. You know, when they're out there in the desert, and he tells everyone, if you stare upon the serpent, you will be healed.
Right. And this brings us to one of the biggest and most important of the conspiracies that you'll hear around Jesus, is that they are actually Lucifer or Lucifera, right? That they are that divine serpent figure that it's appearing in the Bible. They are
the context of that word. The context of that word Lucifer in the first century was not evil at all. It's light bringer. It's not the devil yet. That's a later.
Exactly.
That's an English thing. That's a way later thing. The idea
of the morning star,
the devil. Yeah, that's not a thing until English translations of the Bible come out.
And look at Shaitan within the Hebrew Bible, right? They're more like a lawyer type figure, right? Holding God account for what's going on with Job, right? They're not this malevolent evil that you see that develops within the later tradition of Christianity, you know? So what I'm suggesting is that Jesus Christ is actually fulfilling this kind of Luciferian Asherah type role, right? That already exists within the Hebrew, but has been oppressed and suppressed, you know, and that this is revealing this hidden, dark, feminine tradition that's been there, but it's been suppressed. And this is one of the biggest theories that you're going to find, you know?
Yeah. So just to sum that up real quick, like Ashmun, you got a healer god connected to Attis, a dying and rising like character, whose name means the eighth and healer and oil. So it's a pun on what the Christ actually could mean too. Now, does that mean someone what do you say? So Jesus didn't exist? He's just copied? No. What I'm saying is this person who existed was when they wrote the Gospels and apply all this stuff to this guy who actually lived. It's very simple. It's not like just because he has the traits of God doesn't mean he doesn't exist. What it means is this dude who lived in Nazareth, did these things, got killed. For whatever reason, people thought he was the embodiment of all this stuff. It's very simple.
Right. And it's important too, like when we're looking at the Greek mysteries and we're understanding the mysteries, there are all of these figures that are these light bringer type characters. Okay. So what I think we see with Jesus is he gets in kind of amalgamated with several light bringers. He's clearly Dionysus, right? He's the dying and rising god. He's the blood in the body, the wine, but they're also Lucifer. He's challenging the authority of the church, right? He represents that divine feminine. He does all of these feminine things. He elevates the female, you know, so he's really fulfilling this mystery role of this revealing kind of chthonic force, you know?
Yeah, and to go back to the Old Testament text, right, where you have Tacitus, and I have to throw this in there. Whenever we talk about alternative theories about the Bible, we have to go to Tacitus, and he says that some say that the Jews are fugitives from the island of Crete, who settled on the nearest coast of Africa. Maybe there's a sea people reference there, right? The Minoans or whatever, about the time when Saturn was driven from his throne by the power of Jupiter. Evidence of this, so they're talking about a golden age. They're talking about the end of the golden age into what's the age of now. They're talking about these are ancient people from the golden age, from the island of Crete, where the Pelasgians and the Minoans were. And then evidence of this is sought in the name. There is a famous mountain in Crete called Ida. The neighboring tribe, Idea, came to be called Judea by a barbarous lengthening of the national name. And then others assert, in the reign of Isis, the overflowing population of Egypt, led by hero Shlemus and Judas, discharged itself into the neighboring countries. Many again say that they were a race of Ethiopian origin, who in the time of King Cepheus were driven by fear and hatred of their neighbors to seek a new dwelling place. And then lastly, others describe them as an Assyrian horde, who, not having sufficient territory, took possession of parts of Egypt and founded cities. This is that Hyksos theory right here, of their own, of what is now the Hebrew country, lying the borders of Syria. So you have Tacitus is throwing out these theories about who these people are. And I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
Hyksos, the Hebrew, that's a lot of confrontational stuff that you can get into, saying Judaism could come from Crete, or are the connections, there's so much stuff there to unpack. Whether is it more Afrocentric, you're talking about Judaism in Ethiopia, about the Falasha. The Falasha, those are Ethiopian Jews. They airlifted them. They brought them to Israel. I think that was in the early 70s. They did a big exodus to Israel. You could type in Ethiopian Jews.
Well, check this out. So this is Tacitus still. So remember we were talking about the donkey thing, right? It says Moses wishing to secure land for his authority over the nation, and he opposed all the practices by other men, things sacred to us. Talking about like traditional polytheism, with them have no sanctity. So talking about like sacred orgia and sacred rites of the mysteries, while they allowed what is forbidden. In their holy place, they have consecrated an image of the animal whose guidance they found deliverance from their long, thirsty wanderings. Now, what does that mean? Guess what the story goes? Here's what Tacitus is saying here. I wish he was more specific here, but it's if you put two and two together. The story is that when they were wandering after 7 days and they were thirsty and dying, a pack of donkeys leads them to water. So Tacitus is saying that they have an image of a donkey in their temple. They worship this image of the donkey. And then it says they slay the ram to be as an FU to Ammon, because Ammon is the ram god. And they sacrifice the ox because the Egyptians worship it as Apis.
So this is interesting.
We're seeing a flip of the poles here in rites. Everything's the opposite.
And what this connects with is that there's this theory, it's another conspiracy, but that the Jews are actually worshiping the Egyptian god Set, who's the donkey-headed god of the desert and of disease and of destruction, right? How do the Jews escape from Egypt, right?
Yeah.
They travel through the desert, and they do so through plagues, right? They're able to force the hand of the Pharaoh through plagues. So there are some kind of connection there.
This to me is go ahead.
Well, you know that Jesus tells the beloved John to go steal a donkey. And he goes and he tells him, just go get one, take one. And he steals one, and then Jesus rides into town on that. And that's how he's to proclaim the Messiah, by riding on that donkey. And the donkey is there. If you type in donkey in Mary's birth and pregnancy, the donkey's there the whole time.
Yeah, the symbolism is there for sure.
Yeah, and you'll see the manger. It's there when the baby's being born. It's right there.
Yeah.
But if you know about Islam and the relationship with the donkey, Muhammad goes to heaven on a donkey called Barak. Jalal, the Antichrist, comes back on a donkey. Muhammad is also giving a magic donkey that's called Yafur from Mary the Cop from Egypt, a talking donkey that could talk. And there's also a talking donkey in the Bible of Balaam.
Yeah,
has a talking
Balaam.
donkey.
Look who Balaam is. He's a Gentile. He's not. He's from a different rite. But look at this.
And you know what he did to the donkey? He molested. because the donkey tells him, don't I give you everything at night?
Right. It's great. Look at this, though. We are told that the rest... So this is where it gets into the Sabbatian thing, right? So, because Sabbatios is a Saturn, and Saturn's the seventh day. We didn't get Saturn's Day from the Jews. The Saturn's Day was already there. It was already a universal idea that the seventh day of the week was Saturn's Day, right? But here's what Tacitus has to say about that. We are told that the rest of the seventh day was adopted because this day brought with the termination of their toils, after which the charm of indolence beguiled them into giving up the seventh year also into inaction. But others say that this is an observance of the honor of Saturn, either from the primitive elements of their faith having transmitted from the idea. There is that now, so it takes a little bit of putting two and two together to like Tacitus. He always does this. He's not specific what he's talking about. I wish he was. What is he? The father of the Idaean mysteries is Sabbatios. You have Cybele is the mother. Sabbatios is the father. Okay? So he says it right there, transmitted from the idea, who are said to have shared the flight of that god and to have founded the race, or from the circumstances that of the seven stars, which rule the destinies of men, Saturn moves in the highest orbit with the mightiest power, and that many of the heavenly bodies complete their revolutions and course in multiples of 7. Bam. So you have it right there. He's talking about this is the god of the Sabbatian mystery. That's what he's saying.
Now, question. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
Sabachthani. Is that
is that sabachthani? Is sabazos? Is that the last thing he says when he cries out? He doesn't say Yahweh, Yahweh.
No. What do you think about that, Snappy?
I think it's pretty obvious, right, that the Christ figure, right, is reflecting this amalgamation of various mystery traditions, and that Jesus is clearly performing these divine mystery rites, and it's this apotheosis, right? What I think is happening in Christianity is they're trying to merge Judaism with Greco-Roman pagan ideas and transform them into something palatable for their political exercise.
Yeah.
And they apotheosize Jesus. They basically, they use the existing mythology to their advantage for their political arm, basically.
Remember how we were talking about Tacitus or Dionysus in look at this. This is I didn't even know that. I forgot this was the next chapter. I just stumbled upon it by changing to the next chapter. They believe that being to the supreme and eternal, neither capable of representation nor decay. They therefore do not allow any images to stand in their cities, much less in their temples. This flattery is not paid to their kings nor to the honor of the emperors, from the fact, however, that their priests used to chant. Now think about all the names of these patriarchs, Yaakov and Yasik and Rebecca, you know what I mean? They chant to the music of the flutes and cymbals, the psalms, right? They're singing psalm. That's the whole religion right there. And to wear garlands of ivy and that of a gold. Listen, this is the most important thing. And to wear garlands of ivy and that of a golden vine was found in the temple. He's talking about when Pompey the Great sacked their temple. Was found in the temple, and some have thought they worshipped Father Liber, the conqueror of the East, though their institutions do not by any means harmonize with this theory. So he's basically pointing out it's so weird that everything's pointing that they're worshiping Dionysus, but their rites don't make sense. It doesn't make any sense. He's right. He's
because they have this earlier version, right? They're going to this more Saturnian, we got to understand, a lot of us are removed from the Saturn cult. The Saturn cult is about all of these gods are bigendered. And there's a lot of this weird gender symbolism going on with Saturn, where he is castrated and thrown into the earth. And then you have him associated with the black cube. Who else is associated with the black cube? Cybele. What are her followers doing they're castrating themselves and they're worshiping the meteorite, you know, and you see these worshiping of the black cube also within Islam with the meteorite that's at the center of the Kaaba. You know, this is a piece of tektite. This is again pointing back to this Saturn Kybali cult. You know,
and I want to point something out here too for anyone who's wondering. If Tassus is saying they worship Father Liber, like you have to understand something. Look at this, Father Liber, free father, the god of wine, male fertility, and freedom. It's Bacchus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and you said something snappy. You're like, is it an earlier form of Bacchus? I don't think it's an earlier form of Bacchus. I think it's a more developed, newer form of Bacchus. As Platonism, as skepticism and Platonism and Epicurean thought and peripatetic school thought, Alexandrian school thought starts to influence its neighboring regions, I think Judaism comes out of that. And again, they want to profane the mysteries of Amun, the god Amun. So they're not going to have the orgia. They're going to do all the opposite stuff.
Yeah, but we have to understand. I think you're right. Like, I definitely think you're right. But we have to, like, this is an extraordinarily ancient tradition that's taking several different evolutionary strokes that happen, right? Like, exactly. You have the exile, the Babylonian exile that colors them, right? And they clearly get transformed into like an Egyptian buffer state. You know, there's all this weird stuff that's going on there. Then you have what happens during the reign of Josiah, where they're forcibly bringing everything to the temple at Jerusalem. They're going around and destroying everyone else and amalgamating. So it's like, I do see what you're saying, but what I'm trying to connect here is that there's this primordial Bronze Age Bacchic type religion that's focused around these Saturnian figures, right? And also around these Luciferian light-bringing Venusian figures. These are the things, right? You have this, there are these cults that are associated with the earth, with dying and rising gods. At the center of your right, you have plant entheogens that induce a death state. And then when you awake, you experience the all and are born again, right? And that's happening in almost all of these mysteries.
Yeah.
Fertility, right? You know, and you know, Cabelli, her priests become in Rome, what's that, the cult of Magna Martyr? You know, you're talking about Father Liber and Magna Martyr.
Yeah.
It's like they end up in Rome.
Idaean religion. That's that Minoan Crete religion that influences the whole Mediterranean.
And we can even connect it to Elagabalus, right? Because Elagabalus is bringing that black stone from Syria to Rome, right? This is, again, that Kybali Saturnian imagery.
And you mentioned Elagabalus. Elagabalus is the priesthood that has roots. So if you look at like the story of Elagabalus, he was a priest. His mother was the sister of the Empress of Rome, and then their priesthood traces its roots back to Seleucid Ptolemaic royal marriages, and then even that's even predating the Mark Antony and Cleopatra marry into this family. So they're related to Mark Antony, to Cleopatra, and then people that were appointed by Julius Caesar. Like this,
you know what's ironic about that, Neil?
The royal priesthood.
You know what's ironic about that? Jesus has to be called out of Egypt to fulfill the prophecy, to marry into a family. But also, when I said something about Muhammad got a donkey from Egypt from Mary al-Qabt, he considered himself a son-in-law of Egypt. So he protected her village in Egypt to not harm her village, because he wanted to have that title of marrying into a type of a family, or coming out of Egypt. It's a certain attaching yourself to this older bloodline of Cleopatra.
There's weird stuff going on too with her, because after she dies, a bunch of these Sufis recreate the house that her and Muhammad had. So she was one of his concubines or one of his wives, but she like lived outside of his main harem because she was not the right, she was originally a prostitute, but she had a son who mysteriously dies also, right? There's all this speculation that
Ibrahim
was murdered. But the Sufi mystics recreate this love palace in Egypt where she's from. And there's all these accusations that weird sect rites were going down there classically.
Wow.
That's Mary al-Copt, or Mary the Copt.
Mary the Copt. Yeah.
By the way, Coptic just means Egypt. A Copt.
Yeah.
Egypt. So
there are a couple of different Mary Copts as well. There's another one who's widely considered to be the founder of the modern magical tradition within Arabia. And she, like, even a lot of the Greeks will write about her as inspiring a lot of magic and medicine. So
Maria the alchemist, and she comes up with something that Bain Marie. I don't know if you know what La Bain Marie is. It's a double bath, a double boiler. This is early alchemy. Like even to decant. I don't know if you know in alchemy, to extract something is decantation. Decantation comes from the word cant, is singing, and it's one of those thieves language we were talking about. These double entendres.
Yeah, the thief language is also called cant, and it's also the song, right?
Yeah, and so Maria, she came up with these alchemical formulas, and one of them I was saying is the double bath, the Bain Marie. And there's forms of ancient extractions, because people talk about, well, how did they do this stuff in the ancient times? Well, guess what? We got another form of extraction, and those are animals, using animals for biotransformation to pass herbs through them so the drugs could be bioavailable to the human body through urine or milk.
Yeah, or blood. And, we see this is continuing to this day among different northern peoples, such as the Siberian shamans, who are doing this with the Amanita muscaria mushroom and reindeer urine. Or you even see this among some Inuit groups who are doing this with caribou and their urine in the Amanita muscaria. So this is something that's actively being done all the time with various different types of animals. We have a whole episode on our channel on entheogenic husbandry where we get right deep into it. They're breeding and creating animals for the purposes of processing drugs.
Somebody asked, do you think Jesus was a sorcerer?
100%. He's a sorcerer in the Solomonic tradition. He's a necromancer.
Yeah,
right?
but
he even tells you.
But even more exact than that, even more like the Sanhedrin 43a relates the trial and execution of Jesus and his 5 disciples. Very specific. There's these details, right? Like, is this made up, or why is it? It says here, Jesus, a sorcerer who enticed. Let's read it. The rabbis taught. This is what it says in the text. The rabbis taught Yeshu had 5 disciples: Mattai, Nakai, Buni, and Toda. Already, we're not coming from the Bible. This is not Bible anymore. This is some other source. We're already outside of the Bible because we have different names of his disciples there. It says they brought Mattai in, and he said, shall Mattai be executed? It is written, when Mattai can go meet with God. They said, yes, Mattai shall be executed, for it is written, when Mattai he will die and his name perish. They brought in Nikai, same thing. They brought in Netzer. Shall Netzer be executed? It is written, a branch, Netzer, shall grow out of its roots. Yes, Netzer shall be executed, but you are cast out of your tomb like a rejected branch. They brought in Buni, and they're basically executing them for sorcery and magic.
But also, Jesus what does he do? He summons the winds. How does he summon the power of the winds? Through the invocation of the name Baal Zebul, right? Lord of the high place, right? This is clear Solomonic magic where he's using these Watcher Nephilim spirits to do his bidding, and he's using them to heal and to resurrect and to attack and all this stuff. It's clear Solomonic magic.
And there's certain instances in the New Testament, and they're marked in different lettering even, where he uses Aramaic phrases to do magic spells. And that's even at the end, where it's the Eloi, Eloi, Lama. He says that a few other times, Boanerges, talking about the sons of thunder. He says, Talitha Kum, which means daughter, rise, get up. If you just study the Aramaic words in the Bible, because they're set apart, because it's supposed to be a Greek translation of Hebrew words, so why would you have to put the Aramaic? And that's because he says Aramaic at certain times, and he only says Aramaic when he's doing necromancy.
It's always oh, by the way, all the magic hymns, incantations, like those
Are
bowls,
songs.
they're all written in Aramaic because Aramaic
Yeah, then there's
is a
songs.
language for magic.
Yeah.
Even the Greeks that were living in the Mediterranean, they would say Aramaic word like the way we say abracadabra. That's how they thought of Aramaic. It's some magical language that was used
Right.
for sorcery. Look at this real quick.
Yeah.
Jesus, this is in the Talmud. Jesus the Nazarene is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and instigated and seduced Israel to idolatry. Whoever knows anything in his defense may come and state it. And it says, but since they do not find anything in his defense, they hanged him on the Passover. Do you suppose that Jesus the Nazarene was the one who defense could be made? And then, so apparently nobody stood for, he's charged. His charges, according to Jewish sources, is sorcery. It's crazy. I don't know. Go ahead, Snappy. I think that's mind blowing.
Playing around with dead bodies.
When you look at the Gospels and you're looking for the things that are like that stand out that Jesus is clearly doing, or like you see that are talked about all the time, necromancy is one of them. This is one of the key things that's across the tradition. Jesus resurrects the dead. Jesus casts out demons. That's the work of a necromancer. And it's also important we understand that he's existing within a pre-existing necromantic tradition that is already prevalent within the area around Galilee and Nazareth. Like, there's a really good video on Esoterica you all should watch where Dr. Sledge is going into that, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
You talked about there was only 5 disciples. If you go to the Agape tombs and the island of Malta, and some of them there in the Mediterranean, the Christian original catacombs, they'll show 5 or 7 disciples around having the little Agape love feast.
That's what I'm saying. Like the number 12, it seems like they're putting that on there to make it more
astrotheology. That's to give your that comes later for all that stuff.
And yeah, when you look at this Talmudic source, which everyone always says, oh, it's so late. The Talmud's 5th century, 4th century. No, the people who actually study the Talmud will tell you that it's compiled in the 4th century, but these sources are earlier. These sources are anywhere between 1st, 2nd, or 3rd century. You know, and they specifically say the trial of Jesus probably is late 1st century. So this is not mythology. That's a historical source. You know?
Right.
Thank you, J.R. Pone. Don't Christians can't see Jesus turning water into wine as peculiar? It's basically equating Jesus with Bacchus Dionysus. Such a weird miracle. Yeah, I think it's a polemic. Like, look, Bacchus can do it, so can Jesus.
That's clearly a part of it. Like when you brought on, I always forget his name, but that doctor talks about the Homeric mimesis thesis,
McDonald.
Right? And we have to understand, like, these are texts that are oral, so that people are memorizing and understanding the song and they're telling it and saying it to their children. So what the Christians are doing is they're utilizing the elements of the song so that it's easy to remember and to usurp the pre-existing mythology, right? They're overlaying their interpretation on top of it. They're flipping it around and twisting it up. They're just kind of fucking with the pre-existing tradition, you know?
Yeah, there's a text in Pausanias in his book Description of Greece where he comes upon a temple for Dionysus, and there's 7 jars of wine that are in this temple. And they're supposedly at that location, there was a miracle where they showed up and they were filled with wine because Bacchus brought it. So the idea of Dionysus filling jars of wine is literally a tradition that already exists in Greece.
Isn't it John that has the most Bacchic imagery?
With his cup of
John. Yeah, John is
his bigendered features, like, you know,
John,
what's going on?
In John, he says, I am the true vine, and my father is the husbandman. The husbandman is the God with the scythe in his hand, cutting down all the crops. That's Saturnian. The imagery, like if you're in the 1st century or 2nd century, and you're Greek and you read it, someone reads this text to you, John, I am the true vine, and my father is the husbandman. You're like, oh, that's Bacchus and Saturn. That's Bacchus and Zeus or Saturn. That's Saturnian imagery happening there. Bacchus.
It sounds like your favorite rock band. If someone's telling you about, hey, have you heard of this band? they're kind of like Bacchus, they're kind of like Dionysus. You got to check them out. They sound really good. They have good parties. You go down in the tomb and you can drink their wine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And what do the Christians do? They have those orgies, right? They have these agape love feasts where they're hotboxing the catacombs, lighting their myrrh and their frankincense, anointing themselves with cannabis infused oils, eating their dream fish, eating their ergotized rye, and getting down, right? This is what the early Christians are doing, and a lot of these pagan groups are doing this kind of stuff. These kind of traditions of these ecstatic rites are rampant,
With
and
Saint
all
Cyril,
associated with cults of the dead, ancestor worship.
I know it's Saint Cyril talks about the oiling, how they got to oil up the priests from head to toe.
Right. And Edmund talks about all of those dark rites about oiling up the children, right? In his book, Original Sin. There's all this weird stuff going on.
That got sanitized from the church. They sanitized it because it was an inconvenient story, but it all goes back to the beginning. I want to know why they got rid of the women.
Yeah. And this brings actually up one of my favorite conspiracies as of late, is that maybe Jesus was one of the Echidna, right? Jesus was actually maybe a biological woman who then, through the use of drugs, transitions into this kind of bi-gendered masculine presenting figure that we see within the Bible. And then maybe even John is also one of these Echidna who's, through the use of like horse urine and venoms and other type drugs.
Well, one thing that would point to that is the girdle, or that Jesus wears a bra.
Yeah. And that Jesus is constantly fulfilling all of these feminine things like washing of the feet, which we know is a euphemism for the penis, right? So what is Jesus doing with those feet? What is he washing down there? And he's hanging out with these prostitutes and with all these women. He's associated with all these Marys. It could very well, right? And then there's a virgin birth. There's even, I've heard conspiracies where people are saying, what if the Virgin Mary herself transitions into Jesus? And that's the virgin birth is actually just her being reborn into a man.
Well, and I thought of that because then if you do transition into a new gender or a new person, who is the old person? Is that your mother? Is that your other self? Is that how do you relate to that? Is it like the butterfly and the caterpillar? How do you relate to yourself before you transition? Is it a lover, a mother, a brother, another, a sister?
Right. Well, we know in the mysteries, right, they're going through these death and rebirth rituals, right? Where like the Gali, when they're castrating themselves, they are becoming, something else. They're no longer men. They are something different. They are these bi-gendered priests. So it's like there is a literal death and rebirth that happens through these gender transitions that's going on. It's something that you see all over.
Wow. I'm looking. I'm the only reason why I'm like looking for this story from Pausanias about the wine jars. I want to find it so bad. It's in there. It's somewhere in Pausanias. He wrote a lot. I'm gonna find it.
Yeah. And I know that Jesus, he says, bring the two jars. Bring 2 jars, and then the lady says that's not enough, and he says, don't worry, we'll fill them up.
Like, if we're thinking of Jesus as this atypical mythic character that's coming out of the Dionysian and Saturnian rites, why wouldn't he be a hermaphrodite or one of these female echidna? Why wouldn't that imagery be there? We're seeing these priests constantly doing these kind of rites and this transformation. They have to experience the all. You have to become bi-gendered, right? So I don't think it's a big stretch.
Yeah. The episode we're doing this weekend is looking into the similarities between the Gali and the Inari, different trans priesthoods of ancient times, of Kabeli, Otter Goddess, Astarte. And do those have any connection to the New Testament group there of Jesus and John and Peter?
Is this your podcast, by the way?
Oh, that's my old one.
Okay.
But that one's fun too. Yeah, that's just talking about old pop stuff.
Where should I?
Dion and I are actually collaborating together on Drawing Down the Stars from going forward, like him and I and Rich.
So,
and our
let me just do
podcast
this then.
is,
There you go.
the podcast we two do together is called The Occult Explorers. So if you go into the playlist there, we have like 8 or 9 episodes already done. Yeah. And it's Occult
Explorers. 137 people watching right now. Everybody go subscribe to Drawing Down the Stars. The link's right in the description. You don't have to type anything out. You have to search anything. Go right down. If you're watching on your phone, go right to the description and click where it says subscribe to Snappy at Drawing Down the Stars. Click that link right there and subscribe.
And you'll get both Dion and I, right?
Yeah, Dion and Snappy. They have the video that you're watching right now. They do this every couple of days. They're having these type of conversations all the time. So you'll have a lot of content just like this.
And a lot of it were inspired by you originally, and Amin. I was watching you a while back during work, and that kept me sane during my hours at work.
We're huge fans.
It's good to hear that I'm giving someone something good.
Yeah, the difference is we wanted to take that kind of approach where we're just exploring ideas, right? Where you're going to the experts and you're trying to figure out a more clear version of history. We're kind of having fun with history. We would just want to know what people are saying. What are they talking about? What do people believe? Well, look at that. That's kind of weird. Oh, what the heck? What's that? That's weird. We don't buy into any of this.
It's good to be like that and explore things. And you don't have to be so rigid and academic all the time. It's good to have that mentality when it's necessary, but it's also let's dig into this stuff. Let's throw some wild theories out there.
And then what we try to do is after go back and verify these wild theories with the sources in the text.
Right.
That's what we try to do. Then we go back and we dig. We're crate diggers. We see if we can go in there and if we can find something.
Right. So when we heard something like George St. Clement or George Clement de St. Mark is saying that the priests are eating sperm, we had to go what? Like, that's a wild accusation. Let's go to the roots of this. And then you see it across the pagan tradition. So I can understand where he's at least coming from,
Yeah. This is a good question from Barfling Arcane. What else can you tie Enki to? And I off the bat, I'm going to say Prometheus, because the story of the flood of Noah is a newer version of an older story.
Yeah.
They're not borrowing from Noah. Noah's borrowing from these other traditions. And in these other traditions, you have Enki. Enki tells, is it Gilgamesh, I think, and there's two different stories, Gilgamesh and Artahasis. 2 different stories. And in both cases, Enki says to Artahasis or Gilgamesh, build an ark because Anu is going to flood, or Enlil is going to flood the world. He does not like humans. So you better build an ark and bring your wife on there. And, and then in the reason why I'm talking about Prometheus, because in the Greek story, Prometheus tells his son Deucalion, his mortal son Deucalion, that Zeus is going to flood the world because he isn't like humans, and you're my creation, and I need to save you. So you can go get your wife and get into a chest. They call it a chest, and get in that chest because you're going to survive this flood. So that whole flood story is actually a story from Enki.
Yeah, well, and that parallels Osiris is in a box on the Nile River, and Moses is in a basket.
Yeah,
the story
from Moses from Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah.
Sargon of Akkad has a legendary story written about him where he was put into a basket, set adrift, and then some Babylonians took him in and some priests, and then he lived in the temple of Ishtar, I think it was, or something, where he was like a little priest, cupbearer there. Yeah, it's basically the same story.
And they repurposed all these stories, and then for the past 2,000 years, academics have taught us what to think. And then so now we have to go back and through archaeology, etymology, and the internet, AI, we can go back and we're re-questioning. And I can understand these academics had cushy houses and salaries and 2,000 years of tradition that they didn't want to give up.
Right. And there's this, we get stuck in this Bible-centric way of looking at history, where we're always trying to compare everything to what the Old Testament says and if it lines up or not. When we're really like the Old Testament comes way later.
Yeah,
we should like so even in academia you see that. You see like this, like everything's through the lens of the Old Testament view. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, you do get some other, I really suggest that, just do a lot of reading and don't just take all these academics at face value, because, the academics are just as political as the rest of us. But just going back to like the Enki thing, when I think Enki, I think trickster, right? They're one of these primordial trickster type figures that you see across so many different traditions. They bring magic, they bring technology, they bring reward, but sometimes they bring destruction. You never know with the trickster character, and Enki's clearly fulfilling that kind of a role.
Oh, speaking of semen, the Enki is tied to semen. Do you know that?
No, how?
Well,
I'm not surprised.
I'm even looking at his even on his Wikipedia page, it just says like God of he's the one who creates humans. Look, it's semen. It's like this magic. So what happens is, sorry if I get this wrong, if anyone's a seriologist watching this, but apparently he makes semen, like this magic formula to create humans with. He's the one who creates it. So now that if you think about that, you have to wonder, all these Eucharist, magical blood and all this stuff, what does it have to do with Enki, the trickster, the Promethean god? Is that the layer that's behind it all? You know what I mean?
And staying on this semen motif, I think of the Egyptian creation story with Atum, right? The primordial god who has sex with his hands and ejaculates out the universe. So I also think about this idea, like you have within the Greek tradition with like the story of Kronos and that succession, right? In the earliest version of it, in the Derveni papyri, right? Zeus consumes Kronos' phallus, right? And Kronos consumed Uranos' phallus.
Look at this.
So there's this eating of the scepter, and there's all this imagery around the scepter and drinking the scepter and drinking the milk from the scepter.
It's cultic,
that's all cult language.
Apsu, the begetter of the gods, is inert and sleepy, but finds peace disturbed by the younger gods, so sets out to destroy them. His grandson Enki, chosen to represent the younger gods, puts a spell on Apsu, casting him into a deep sleep, thereby confining him deep underground. Enki subsequently sets up his home in the depths of Apsu. Enki thus takes on all the functions of Apsu, including his fertilizing powers as Lord of Waters and Lord of Semen.
Mm.
And that's just there's a lot going on there. Sumerian word for semen is Ab. Abba, father, semen. See it?
Yeah, Abba is one of the phrases that's used. The Aramaic spells that Jesus uses is Abba.
In another version of this myth, Ninhursag takes Enlil Enki's semen from Utu's womb and plants it. This is the one I was thinking of, and plants it into the earth, where eight plants rapidly germinate. With his two-faced servant and steward Isimond, Enki in the swampland lies stretched out. What is this plant? What is this? This is so crazy. His messenger Isimud answers him, "My king, this is the tree plant." He cuts it off from him, and he Enki eats it. And so, despite warnings, Enki consumes the other 7 fruit, consuming his own semen. He falls pregnant, ill with swellings. That's crazy. I forgot about this. I did a whole video about this actually. With Dr. Monger. He told me all about this.
This could be the oldest roots of this, huh? Sumer?
Yeah, of course.
It's important too, though, that we have the proper mindset for a lot of this. It's like they're transforming these priests and these priestesses into drug production machines, as well as their animals. So when they're ingesting the semen or the vaginal excretions or the menses, or they're ingesting the breast milk, all of these people who are providing these fluids are also been fed tons and tons of drugs and are processing these drugs, you know, just like you would see them doing with the reindeer or other animals like we were talking about, you know. And we know that shamans do this regularly. Like, people consume the urine of shamans in order to have hallucinogenic trips, right?
Yeah. So
well, you know, guys, I'm gonna have to bounce now.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can wind it down now. So before we go,
it's been so good.
Yeah, no, I agree. We've been doing this for 2.5 hours almost, but I just want to make sure you guys who are still watching, please go and subscribe to Drawing Down the Stars. They are going to start putting out. They already have a lot of good content out there, and I'm part of the channel a lot. So
we do a weekly show with Neil.
Consider it one of my second channels. There you go. Like, even though it's your channel, but I'm on there so much that you're going to see me. That's why I'm saying that, just to get people to say, like, I'm there so much. Like, and you guys are both there, and so go and subscribe, and you won't regret it. So, and the last
we have a show with Neil called The Witches Symposium that we also do with Dr. Ammon and our good friend Wretch. Yeah. And we're doing that every week, where we're just kind of, puffing on some Mysterian and throwing out our craziest ideas.
Yeah, just links in the description, and I also just gave a comment. Hail Satan, by the way.
Thanks, Mandy.
Any last words?
Thank you for the great job you do, Neil.
Thank you for coming.
You're helping people just to reevaluate how we relate to stories from the past and how these stories rule our lives.
And you're encouraging people to educate themselves and to read. Like, this is our passion. Like, the reason why Neil and I are friends is because when we get off the stream, we're both going to go read some books.
Right. Yeah. We're the same. We do the same shit. But anyways, this has been great, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis.